From 1986 to 1989, my husband and I were Peace Corps volunteers in Niger, West Africa. Niger is a sub-Saharan country. This slide shows the top 10 countries with the lowest literacy rate. And this is a bubble graph from Hans Gosling. It shows the health and wealth of nations, and you can see that Niger is over there on the left, showing that they have a lower life expectancy than most countries, and the average income per person is about $600 per year. So we were Peace Corps volunteers, and the whole idea about Peace Corps is to promote peace by learning about and understanding each other's country. So you go to a developing country, you work, you learn about the country, and hopefully they learn something about you. This image here is from a cloth. The women wear brightly colored print fabrics, and sometimes the prints show socioeconomic images, and that's the case here. The words say Murhum Zamani Apkin Itachi. That means improved cook stove saves wood. And this is what my husband did. Showed them how to make these little cook stoves right around the traditional stove, but it saved a lot of wood in a country where deforestation is a problem. My job was as an English teacher. Here we are, we're in the center of the slide here on an awesome trip we took in the Niger Mountains. Where we lived, though, was not in the mountains, was just flat and desert, and with some trees. This little boy is standing next to his mother's mortar and pestle. The pestle is about 5 or 6 feet long, pretty heavy, and they use it every day to grind the millet into flour. It's hard work for them. And the quote here is from Dr. Wilson's paper on critical stance. And it's the section where he talks about how Frere describes that by bringing literacy to developing nations, we can help the oppressed find their political voice. I included this because it directly relates to one of the two experiences I'm going to recount for you. I also need to say, before I recount these experiences, that I had a great rapport with my students. When I was observed one time by my supervisor, as we walked out of the class, she said, "Laura, they love you." And I said, "Yes, I love them back." And this is how strong the rapport is, even though it sounds kind of corny. That's how good the rapport was. So my first experience is when I learned something about colonialism. Niger had been colonized by the French, and there were quite a few negative impacts from that. One day I gave homework to them to write a one-page essay about what they would do if they were the minister of some department. And they had trouble understanding the assignment, so I gave the example, well, if I were the minister of education, I would have all the teachers teach in the local language. Because at the time, and I think still today, all the teachers use French as the language of teaching rather than the local language that all the kids speak all the time at home. So even in kindergarten, the kids come to school and their teachers speak in French to them. And of course they mix in some of the local language too, but it's mostly French. And the kids did not understand my example, and they just kept going back and forth on it, and I couldn't understand why they couldn't understand. And finally, one student raised his hand and said, "Well, Miss, in your home country, in America, what do the teachers speak in school?" And I said, "English." And they said, "But what do you speak at home?" And I said, "English." And he said, "Well, what does your mother speak?" And I said, "English." And that's when I realized that they didn't know that most of the countries in the world present their education in their own language. That this was just places like Niger where another language had been imposed upon them. So it was a real eye-opener for all of us. We arrived in Niger in 1986, and at the time it was a military dictatorship, basically a police state. And in 1987, my second year there, the dictator suddenly died. And the whole country was kind of nervous and on edge and a little bit fearful because nobody knew what was going to happen. And the Peace Corps office sent out a communique to us telling us to lie low. Fortunately, nothing bad did happen, but there was some good things that happened. A conversation began in the capital city about having elections and about forming a new constitution. And this conversation spread among the educated portion of the population, which was about 10%, and that included my students. And my students, they were in a classroom just like this one, except that it was more crowded. I usually had 3 or 4 students to a table. And my students were older. They were about 16 or 17. And one day after class, I had, actually at the end of class, I had some extra time, so I asked if anyone had any questions, meaning about the lesson, and nobody did. And I said, any questions, anything at all, meaning any other lessons, any English. And there was a pause, and then a student raised his hand, and he said, Miss, what is democracy? And it still gives me a chill to talk about this story because I realized that these students were the future leaders of the country. And they hadn't had any experience with democracy. They didn't even know what it was. So I had the honor of being able to give them an overview of the concepts. And this is what I learned from those experiences and from many more experiences, teaching experiences since then. When you're a teacher, you really need to take a critical stance towards your practice because we have an impact on our students, and that impact can last throughout their lives. And that impact can cause ripples to their family, their neighbors, friends, and even to their whole country. So it's really important that as teachers we're ethical in our dealings with students and we are conscious of the impact that we can have upon them, and that we're respectful of the context in which we're working and the culture of the students. The music that I'm playing is from Jaluka. It was very popular in Niger at that time, and we listened to it a lot. We really enjoyed it.